The rain was drumming against the windshield like 1,000 frantic fingers, but inside the car, the silence was deafening. David looked at his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, sitting in the back seat. She was staring out the window, her eyes vacant, her lips pressed into a thin, pale line. "We're almost home, sweetie," David said, his voice cracking. "We can watch that movie you like, the one with the talking animals." Lily didn't blink. She didn't nod. She just tightened her grip on the headless teddy bear she'd been carrying for 3 months. To the world, Lily was just the shy girl, the girl who didn't play at recess, the girl who hid behind her father's legs at the grocery store. David had told himself 1,000 times that she was just sensitive, like her mother had been. But then, a neighbor he barely knew, a woman who lived in the shadows of the house across the street, had leaned over the fence that morning and whispered 6 words that shattered David's world. "She isn't shy, David, she's terrified." In that moment, the mundane reality of David's life evaporated, replaced by a chilling realization. He didn't know his daughter at all. And worse, he didn't know the monsters hiding in plain sight within his own home. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen window of the Miller household, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floor. On the surface, it was a picture of suburban perfection. David, a successful architect, stood at the counter pouring cereal, while his wife, Elena, buzzed around the room, her high heels clicking a rhythmic beat of efficiency. "Don't forget her lunchbox, David," Elena said, her voice bright and polished. She leaned over and kissed David's cheek, the scent of expensive perfume lingering in the air. "And remember, the therapist said we shouldn't push her. If she doesn't want to talk about her day, let it be." David nodded, his gaze drifting to the small figure sitting at the kitchen table. Lily was meticulously separating her cereal into different colors. She was a beautiful child with dark curls that framed a face far too serious for a second grader. "Hey, Lil Bug," David said softly, crouching down to her eye level. "Ready for the big art project today? I heard you guys are using glitter." Lily's hand paused over a green loop of cereal. She didn't look up. She simply took a slow, shallow breath and moved a red loop to the other side of the bowl. "She's just in one of her moods," Elena whispered, smoothing her skirt. "You know how she is. Just like my sister, selective mutism, the doctors call it. She'll outgrow it. Now I have to run. That gallery opening won't organize itself." David watched his wife leave, a nagging feeling tugging at his chest. Elena was always so sure. She was the one who handled the doctors, the school meetings, and the playdate, invites that Lily inevitably sat through in total silence. David worked long hours at the firm, often coming home after Lily was already tucked into bed. He relied on Elena's reports. "She had a great day. She's just being shy. She laughs so much at the park." But as David looked at his daughter now, he didn't see a shy child. He saw a child who seemed to be holding her breath, as if the very act of existing was a gamble. "Lily," David said, reaching out to ruffle her hair. The reaction was instantaneous. Lily flinched. It wasn't a small movement. Her entire body jerked away from his hand, and for a split second her eyes met his. In that brief flash, David didn't see the innocence of a child. He saw a raw, jagged fear that made his blood run cold. Then, just as quickly, the shutters went back up. Lily looked back down at her cereal, her expression returning to that blank porcelain mask. "I'm sorry, baby," David muttered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I didn't mean to startle you." He dropped her off at school 20 minutes later. He watched her walk toward the heavy double doors, her backpack looking too heavy for her small frame. She didn't turn back to wave. She never did. As David pulled away from the curb, he tried to shake the image of her flinching. "It's just nerves," he told himself. "The world is a loud place for a quiet girl." He had no idea that the quiet he lived in was a carefully constructed prison, and the key was about to be handed to him by the person he least expected. The architecture firm was a blur of blueprints and deadlines, but for the first time in 10 years, David couldn't focus. The image of Lily flinching, that sharp, instinctive recoil, played on a loop in his mind. It wasn't the reaction of a shy child. It was the reaction of a creature that expected to be hit. "David, you with us?" Marcus, his business partner, tapped the glass of the conference table. The rest of the team was staring. David realized he'd been holding a red pen over a client's floor plan until the ink bled into a thick, dark stain. "Sorry," David muttered, wiping his hand. "Just a rough morning with Lily. She's struggling." Marcus sighed, leaning back. "Kids are resilient, man. My oldest didn't say a word until he was 4, and now we can't get him to shut up. Elena says she's just going through a phase, right? Trust your wife. She's got the mom intuition thing down." David nodded, but the knot in his stomach tightened. Trust your wife. He did trust Elena. She was the one who had stayed home during those first difficult years. She was the one who researched the best schools and organized the sensory-friendly birthday parties that Lily sat through like a ghost. But as the clock struck 3, an impulse he couldn't explain seized him. He didn't wait for his assistant to clear his schedule. He grabbed his coat and left. He reached Lily's school just as the bell rang. A sea of colorful backpacks and shouting children spilled onto the sidewalk. David scanned the crowd, looking for the familiar yellow coat he'd zipped up that morning. He found her standing by the brick wall, 10 feet away from a group of girls playing hopscotch. She wasn't watching them. She was looking at the ground, her fingers twisted into the fabric of her sleeves. "Lily!" David called out, waving. She didn't run to him. She walked, her head down, her steps measured and slow. As they walked to the car, a teacher, Mrs. Gable, caught David's eye. "Mr. Miller, a word?" David paused, holding Lily's hand. It felt cold and limp. "Is everything okay?" Mrs. Gable looked hesitant. She glanced at Lily, then back at David. Lily was very quiet today, even more than usual. During art, she drew a picture, but then she scribbled over it so hard she tore the paper. When I tried to ask her about it, she just stared at the wall. "Has anything changed at home?" "No," David said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Everything is fine. We're working with a specialist." "I see," the teacher replied, her voice trailing off. "Just keep an eye on her, David. Shyness is one thing, but Lily seems to be retreating into a place where we can't reach her." The drive home was silent. David kept glancing in the rearview mirror, hoping to catch a glimpse of the real Lily. He pulled into the driveway of their pristine suburban home. Elena's car wasn't there yet. She had mentioned a late lunch with some donors for the gallery. As David helped Lily out of the car, he noticed a woman standing across the street. It was Mrs. Gable's polar opposite. Mrs. Gable was polished and professional. This woman was disheveled. It was Martha, the neighbor everyone in the neighborhood whispered about. She lived in a house with overgrown hedges and peeling paint. People said she was unbalanced after losing her husband. David usually gave a polite, distant wave and hurried inside. But today, Martha was standing at the edge of her lawn, staring directly at Lily. "Come on, Lily, let's go get a snack," David said, guiding her toward their front door. "David!" The voice was raspy, cutting through the quiet afternoon. David turned. Martha was crossing the street, her eyes wide and frantic. She stopped just a few feet away, her breath coming in short bursts. "David, listen to me," she whispered, her eyes darting toward his front door as if expecting someone to burst out. "Martha, it's not a good time," David said, reaching for his keys. "Lily needs to get inside." Martha stepped closer, ignoring him. She looked down at Lily, and for a second, a look of profound pity crossed her face. Then she looked at David, her voice dropping to a low, urgent hiss. "She isn't shy, David. She's terrified. And she isn't terrified of the world. She's terrified of what happens when you aren't home." David froze. The keys jingled in his trembling hand. "What are you talking about? My wife is home with her every day. Elena takes perfect care of her." Martha leaned in, the scent of stale tea and old paper clinging to her. "Do you ever wonder why she only loses her voice when you're around? Or why she looks at your wife like a rabbit looks at a hawk? Watch the windows, David. Stop listening to what you're told and start seeing what's right in front of you." Before David could respond, a car turned the corner. It was Elena's white SUV. Martha's face went pale. She spun around and hurried back across the street without another word, disappearing behind her overgrown hedges just as Elena pulled into the driveway. Elena hopped out, a radiant smile on her face, carrying a bag of organic groceries. "Hey, you're home early. What a treat." She walked over and kissed David, then reached down to pat Lily's cheek. Lily didn't flinch this time. She stood perfectly still, stiffer than a statue. "Everything okay, honey?" Elena asked, looking from David to the empty street. "You look like you've seen a ghost." David looked at his beautiful wife, then at the house where Martha had vanished, then down at his silent daughter. The seed of doubt had been planted, and it was cold as ice. "I'm fine," David lied, his heart hammering. "Just a long day." The evening followed its usual sterile script. Elena moved through the kitchen with the grace of a dancer, humming a light tune as she prepared a sea bass dinner. To anyone looking through the window, they were the American dream. But David felt like he was watching a play from the back of a dark theater, seeing the wires and the trap doors for the first time. "Lily, honey, go wash up for dinner," Elena said, her voice like honey. Lily didn't move immediately. She looked at David, her eyes searching his for something. Permission? Protection? "Go on, Lil Bug," David said, trying to keep his voice steady. As the little girl trudged upstairs, David turned to Elena. She was elegantly chopping asparagus, the knife hitting the wooden board with a sharp thwack, thwack, thwack. "Elena," David began, leaning against the counter, "I saw Martha today, across the street." The knife stopped, just for a fraction of a second. Elena didn't look up, but her shoulders stiffened. "Oh, poor Martha, she's been having a hard time lately. I heard from the neighborhood association that her sister is looking into assisted living for her. She's been wandering." "She said something strange to me," David pressed, his eyes fixed on his wife's profile. "She said Lily isn't shy. She said she's terrified." Elena let out a soft, melodic laugh and finally turned around, wiping her hands on her linen apron. She stepped close to David, placing her hands on his chest. "David, love. Martha lost her husband and her only child in a car accident 20 years ago. Every time she sees a young girl, she projects her own trauma. It's heartbreaking, really, but you can't listen to the delusions of a woman who talks to her houseplants." She reached up and smoothed the hair at his temple. "Lily is sensitive. The therapist explained this. She has a high arousal temperament. New environments, loud noises, even your deep voice sometimes can trigger her freeze response. We have to be her safe harbor, not give in to neighborhood gossip." David wanted to believe her. It was so much easier to believe the woman he loved than the crazy lady across the street. But then he remembered the look on Martha's face. It wasn't confusion, it was recognition. Dinner was a quiet affair. Lily pushed her food around her plate, creating small mounds of mashed potatoes. "Eat your vegetables, Lily," Elena said. It wasn't a yell. It was a command wrapped in a whisper, cold as a winter wind. Lily's fork trembled. She took a bite of the asparagus, swallowed it without chewing, and then sat perfectly still. That night, David couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, listening to the rhythmic breathing of his wife beside him. The house felt different, heavier. At 2 a.m., he got up to get a glass of water. As he passed Lily's room, he saw the door was cracked open. A sliver of moonlight fell across the carpet. He crept toward it, intending to close it softly so the draft wouldn't wake her. He peered inside. Lily wasn't in her bed. His heart leaped into his throat. "Lily?" he whispered. He looked toward the corner of the room. Lily was sitting on the floor in the dark, tucked into the narrow space between her dresser and the wall. She had her sketchbook open, but she wasn't drawing. She was just sitting there, clutching a flashlight that wasn't turned on. "Lily, sweetie, what are you doing?" David whispered, kneeling beside her. She looked at him, and in the dim light, David saw her lip was bleeding. A tiny, fresh, crimson bead. "Did you fall?" David reached out, his heart breaking. Lily pulled back, tucking her chin into her chest. She didn't point, she didn't speak, but she looked toward the bedroom door, the door that led to the hallway where Elena's room was. David felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. He looked at the sketchbook on the floor. On the page there was a drawing of a large, beautiful bird in a cage. The cage didn't have bars, it was made of eyes. Dozens of eyes, all watching the bird. "Is this how you feel, Lily?" David asked, his voice trembling. Lily didn't answer. She just closed her eyes and leaned her head against the cold wood of the dresser. David stayed there on the floor with her until she fell into a fitful sleep. As he carried her back to bed, he realized Martha was right about one thing. Lily wasn't shy. She was hiding. But from what? And why did it feel like the answer was sleeping right down the hall in his own bed? The next morning, the house felt like a stage set where the actors had forgotten their lines. Elena was her usual radiant self, humming as she packed Lily's lunch with organic kale chips and sliced apples. She looked like the perfect mother, the kind of woman other parents envied at PTA meetings. "Sleep well, darling?" Elena asked, pressing a travel mug of coffee into David's hand. Her smile was blinding, but David noticed it didn't quite reach her eyes. They remained cool, observant, like the eyes in Lily's drawing. "I was up a bit with Lily," David said, watching her carefully. She was sitting on the floor again. Elena's hand paused over the lunchbox. She didn't turn around. "Oh, the night terrors. I told you, David, the doctor said sleepwalking and night anxiety are common for children with her condition. It's best not to make a fuss. It only reinforces the behavior." "She had a cut on her lip, Elena," David said, his voice dropping an octave. Elena turned then, her expression a perfect mask of concern. "I know. She tripped in the bathroom yesterday afternoon while you were at work. I cleaned it up and gave her a big hug. Didn't I tell you? Silly me, I was so busy with the gallery gala details." She walked over and smoothed David's lapel. "You're stressed, David. You're starting to see monsters in every corner. Maybe you should take a long weekend. We could all go to the cabin." The cabin. It was isolated, deep in the woods, with no cell service and no neighbors for miles. Usually, David loved the idea. Today, it sounded like a threat. "I can't. Big presentation on Friday," David lied. He watched them leave from the window, Elena leading Lily by the hand. Lily walked with her shoulders hunched, her steps mechanical. As the SUV pulled out of the driveway, David didn't go to work. Instead, he waited. He waited until the street was empty. Then he crossed the asphalt to the house with the overgrown hedges. He knocked on Martha's door. It took a long time, but finally, the heavy oak door creaked open. Martha stood there wearing a faded cardigan, her gray hair a bird's nest around her face. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You saw the drawing, didn't you?" she asked without a greeting. David stepped inside. The house smelled of lavender and old newspapers. "How did you know about the drawings?" Martha led him to her kitchen window. From here, she had a perfect, unobstructed view of the Millers' upstairs windows, specifically Lily's room and the playroom next to it. "I sit here a lot, David. Old bones don't move much," Martha said, pointing a trembling finger across the street. "I see what happens when the perfect mother thinks the world isn't looking. I see the way she shakes that little girl. I see the way she locks her in that playroom for hours when she misbehaves." David felt a surge of cold fury. "Elena would never. She loves her. She spends every waking moment caring for her." "She spends every waking moment controlling her," Martha snapped, her eyes flashing with sudden clarity. "Control isn't love, David. It's a cage. Your wife doesn't want a daughter. She wants a doll that doesn't talk back. And when the doll makes a sound, she punishes it." Martha reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. "Lily threw this out the window 2 nights ago. I went out in the rain to get it." David smoothed out the paper. It wasn't a drawing. It was a series of tallies marked in red crayon. Beneath the tallies, in a child's shaky handwriting, were the words, "The red door stays locked until I'm good. I'm never good." David's heart stopped. The playroom in their house had a small storage closet. He had painted the door bright red when they moved in, thinking it would be a fun, secret clubhouse for Lily. "She locks her in there?" David whispered, the room spinning. "Check the door, David," Martha said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "Check the inside of the door." David didn't say goodbye. He ran back across the street, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He burst into his own home, the silence now feeling like a suffocating weight. He ran up the stairs 2 at a time toward the playroom. He reached the red door. It was closed. He turned the handle. It was unlocked now, of course. He stepped into the tiny, windowless closet. It was barely 4 feet wide. He closed the door behind him, plunging himself into darkness. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it onto the back of the red door. His breath hitched. The bottom half of the door was covered in tiny, frantic scratches. Fingernail marks. Some were shallow, some were deep gouges in the wood, and near the floor, hidden behind a stack of old board games, were 3 small words scratched into the paint with something sharp. "Help me, Daddy?" David collapsed onto the floor of the closet, the phone shaking in his hand. His wife, The woman he slept next to, the woman he trusted with his life, wasn't protecting their daughter. She was the one Lily was hiding from. And then he heard the front door open downstairs. "David?" Elena's voice rang out, cheerful and melodic. "I forgot my phone. Are you home?" David stayed frozen in the dark closet, his heart hammering against the red wood. He realized then that he wasn't just a father anymore. He was a witness, and if he wasn't careful, he and Lily would both be trapped in the cage forever. David sat in the suffocating darkness of the red closet, the scratched plea for help burning into his retinas. "Help me, Daddy." The words weren't just a message, they were an indictment of his own blindness. "David, are you up there?" Elena's footsteps were rhythmic, clicking on the hardwood stairs. Each step sounded like a ticking clock. David realized he couldn't let her find him here. Not yet. He didn't have a plan, and if Elena was capable of this, he didn't know what else she was capable of. He scrambled out of the closet, closing the red door softly, and ducked into the master bedroom just as Elena reached the landing. He threw himself onto the bed and grabbed a book from the nightstand, pretending to read. "Oh, you're here," Elena said, leaning against the door frame. She was slightly out of breath, her cheeks flushed. "I thought I heard someone upstairs. Why aren't you at the office?" David didn't look up immediately. He needed a second to steady his voice. "I forgot some files for the presentation. I was just about to head out." Elena walked over to the bed. She sat on the edge, her weight shifting the mattress. She reached out and touched his hand, the same hand that, according to Martha, shook their daughter. Her skin was cool, her touch practiced and gentle. "You look pale, David. Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you're coming down with whatever Lily has." "Whatever Lily has," David repeated, his voice tighter than he intended. "Her anxiety," Elena said smoothly, standing up to check her reflection in the mirror. She adjusted her pearl earring. "It's draining for all of us. I'm exhausted, to be honest. I spend all day trying to coax a single word out of her, and she just stares. It's like she's doing it on purpose to punish me." David watched her in the mirror. For a fleeting second, the perfect mother mask slipped. Her eyes looked hard, glittering with a resentment so sharp it was chilling. Then, with a blink, it was gone. She was the grieving, patient wife again. "I have to get back to the gallery," she said, blowing him a kiss. "Don't work too hard, honey." As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, David didn't go to the office. He went to the kitchen and looked at the junk drawer. He found what he was looking for, a small, voice-activated digital recorder he'd bought for dictating architectural notes. He walked back upstairs to the playroom. He looked at the red door, a wave of nausea rolling over him. He knelt down and taped the tiny recorder to the underside of a heavy toy chest inside the closet. It was invisible, unless you were lying flat on the floor. "I'm coming for you, Lily," he whispered to the empty room. That afternoon, David sat in his car outside Lily's school, watching the doors. When she came out, she looked smaller than ever. Elena was there, waiting. David watched from a distance as Elena leaned down. From this far away, it looked like a motherly whisper. But David saw Lily's shoulders hitch toward her ears. He saw the way Lily climbed into the back seat without a word, her movements stiff, like a wooden puppet. David followed them at a safe distance. Instead of going home, Elena pulled into the parking lot of a local park, one that was usually deserted on a Tuesday afternoon. David parked behind a row of thick pines and got out, creeping through the brush. He saw them sitting on a bench near the pond. Elena was talking, her gestures animated. Lily was sitting with her hands tucked under her thighs. Suddenly, Elena grabbed Lily's chin, forcing the girl to look at her. Even from 30 yards away, David could see the intensity in Elena's posture. She wasn't comforting her. She was lecturing her. Lily began to cry, quiet, shaking sobs that didn't make a sound. Elena didn't hug her. She pulled a tissue from her purse, wiped Lily's face with a rough, scrubbing motion, and then stood up, pointing toward the car. David felt a primal urge to run out and snatch Lily away, to scream at Elena until his lungs gave out. But he stopped. If he took Lily now without proof, Elena, with her perfect reputation and her devoted mother persona, would win the legal battle. She would paint him as unstable. He needed more. He needed the truth recorded. He beat them back to the house by 5 minutes, parking around the corner and entering through the back door. He hid in his basement office, his heart hammering as he heard them enter. "Go upstairs and think about what I said, Lily." Elena's voice floated down the stairs. "Since you don't want to use your voice to speak to me, you can use your silence in the quiet room. Maybe then you'll learn to appreciate your mother." David heard the heavy footsteps of his daughter, followed by the unmistakable click of the red door closing. Then the sound of a heavy chair being pushed in front of it. His blood turned to ice. She didn't just lock it, she barricaded it. He sat in the dark of his office, tears streaming down his face, listening to the silence of his own home. He knew that tonight, when everyone was asleep, he would retrieve that recorder. And he knew that after he heard what was on it, his life would never be the same. The house was a tomb of artificial peace. David sat at the dinner table that night, moving his fork across a plate of pasta that tasted like cardboard. Across from him, Elena was scrolling through her phone, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of the screen. "Lily isn't hungry tonight," Elena said casually, not looking up. "She's having one of her silent protests. I told her she could come down when she was ready to be part of the family." David looked at the empty chair. His daughter was upstairs, likely sitting in the dark behind a red door barricaded by a chair. The rage inside him was a living thing now, a serpent coiling tighter and tighter around his heart. "Maybe I should go talk to her," David said, his voice dangerously low. Elena's eyes snapped up from her phone. Her expression didn't change, but her grip on the device tightened. "No, David, we agreed. Consistency is key. If you go up there now, you're just rewarding the behavior. Let her sit with her choices." Her choices? David thought. She's 7 years old. He managed to survive the rest of the evening by playing the part of the tired, oblivious husband. He kissed Elena goodnight. He climbed into bed and waited. He waited for the house to settle, for the floorboards to stop creaking, and for Elena's breathing to turn into the deep, rhythmic sleep of the guilty. At 3 a.m., David slipped out of bed. He didn't turn on any lights. He navigated the hallway by memory, his bare feet silent on the carpet. He reached the playroom. The heavy armchair was still pushed against the red door. With shaking hands, David leaned his weight into the chair, sliding it back inch by inch to avoid a screech against the wood. When the gap was wide enough, he turned the handle and stepped into the closet. The air inside was stale and hot. He felt around under the toy chest until his fingers brushed the cold plastic of the recorder. He clicked it off and tucked it into his pocket. Then he looked down. Lily was there, curled into a ball on the floor, sleeping on a pile of old blankets. In the dim light from the hallway, he saw she was holding a single, torn page from a notebook. He gently pried it from her hand. It was a drawing of him, David, but he was far away, standing on top of a mountain, while she was at the bottom in a deep, dark hole. He wanted to wake her. He wanted to scoop her up and run out the front door and never look back. But he knew the law. He knew Elena's father was a retired judge with deep pockets and a deeper ego. If he left now without irrefutable evidence, he might lose Lily forever. He retreated to the basement, locked his office door, and plugged the recorder into his laptop. He put on his headphones. The first hour was silence. The faint sound of a car passing outside, the hum of the air conditioning, then the sound of the door opening, the heavy scrape of the chair. "Still won't talk," Elena's voice came through the speakers, distorted but unmistakable. It wasn't the sweet melodic voice she used in public. It was a jagged, ugly snarl. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Thinking Daddy will save you if you just play the victim?" David heard a small, muffled sob. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." There was a sharp smack, the sound of skin hitting skin. David's eyes filled with tears. "You're just like your grandmother, weak, pathetic. If you say one word to him, one word about what happens in here, I'll make sure you never see that dog of yours again. Do you understand?" Silence. Then a shaky, whispered, "Yes, Mommy." David ripped the headphones off. He felt like he was going to be sick. Lily could talk. She wasn't mutistic. She was being silenced through pure, unadulterated terror. Elena wasn't just controlling her. She was systematic in her psychological torture. But then the recording continued. David forced himself to put the headphones back on. "Good," Elena whispered, "because Daddy doesn't really want a broken daughter anyway. He only stays because of me. If I left, he'd leave you too. Remember that." The recording ended with the sound of the door slamming and the chair being pushed back into place. David sat in the dark, the blue light of the computer screen reflecting in his tear-streaked eyes. He had the evidence. He had the recording of the abuse. But as he replayed Elena's words, "He only stays because of me," he realized the depth of the gaslighting. Elena hadn't just convinced the world Lily was shy, she had convinced Lily that her own father was an accomplice to her misery. He stood up, his jaw set. He wasn't going to the police yet, not until he spoke to the one person who had seen the truth before he had. He needed Martha, and he needed to know what else Martha had seen through those windows. The sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when David slipped out of his back door, the digital recorder burning a hole in his pocket. The neighborhood was bathed in a ghostly pre-dawn blue. He crossed the street, his breath hitching in the cold air, and didn't stop until he was pounding on Martha's door. "Martha, it's David, open up!" The porch light flickered on, casting a harsh yellow glare. After a series of locks clicking, Martha appeared. She looked older in the morning light, her face a map of deep-set wrinkles and sorrow. She didn't ask why he was there. She simply stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. "You heard it," she said. It wasn't a question. David collapsed into a kitchen chair, the weight of the night finally crushing him. "I heard everything. She hits her. She tells her I don't love her. She locks her in that closet for hours." He looked up at Martha, his eyes bloodshot. How long? How long has this been going on?" Martha set a chipped mug of black coffee in front of him. "Longer than you want to know, David. I started noticing 2 years ago. It started with the garden. Lily used to love the flowers. Then one day, Elena dragged her inside by the hair because she got dirt on her dress. I saw it from my bedroom window." "Why didn't you call the police?" David's voice rose, a mix of grief and accusation. Martha sat across from him, her hands trembling. "I did, twice. The first time, the police came, and Elena greeted them with a tray of cookies and a smile. She told them I was a confused old woman who'd lost her mind after my husband died. She showed them Lily's bedroom, the beautiful, perfect part of it. Lily was too terrified to say a word. The officers left apologized to her for the trouble. She leaned forward, her gaze piercing. The second time I called, social services showed up. Elena had a folder ready. Medical records, psychological evaluations. She had 3 different doctor's notes saying Lily had pathological shyness and tendencies towards self-harm. She turned the investigation around and made it look like Lily was the problem, and she was the long-suffering saint of a mother. David felt a cold dread settle in his marrow. Elena hadn't just been abusing Lily. She had been building a legal fortress. Every therapy session, every medical update she'd given him had been a calculated move to discredit Lily and gaslight David. "She's a monster," David whispered. "She's a performer," Martha corrected. "And performers hate an audience they can't control. That's why she hates me. I'm the only one who sees the stage hands." Martha reached into a ceramic jar on the counter and pulled out a small, leather-bound diary. "I've kept a log, dates, times, what I saw through the windows, the nights the playroom light stayed on until 4 a.m., the days Lily was forced to stand in the corner of the backyard for 3 hours without moving." David took the diary. As he flipped through the pages, his heart broke 1,000 times over. It was a chronicle of his daughter's torture, written in the shaky hand of a neighbor who had been helpless to stop it. "There's something else," Martha said, her voice dropping. "Something I saw last week. Elena was in the garage. She was packing a suitcase, not a small one, a heavy one, and she was hiding it under a tarp in the corner." David frowned. "She hasn't said anything about a trip. She said we were going to the cabin this weekend." "That's just it," Martha said, her eyes wide with alarm. "She wasn't packing for a weekend. She was packing like she was never coming back. And David, she was putting Lily's passport in her purse." The realization hit David like a physical blow. Elena knew the walls were closing in. Maybe she'd seen him talking to Martha. Maybe she'd noticed a change in his behavior. She wasn't just abusing Lily anymore. She was planning to kidnap her, to take her somewhere David would never find them. "I have to go back," David said, standing up so quickly his chair toppled. "I have to get her out of there." "No!" Martha grabbed his arm with surprising strength. If you go in there and snatch her now, Elena will call the police. She has the paperwork, David. She has the history of Lily's mental health. She'll claim you've had a breakdown. You need to be smarter. You need to catch her in the act. David looked out the window at his house. The lights were coming on in the master bedroom. Elena was waking up. The play was about to begin another day. I can't leave her in there for another minute, David choked out. Then give her a signal, Martha whispered. Tell her you know. Tell her you're the audience now. Once she knows she's not alone, she'll find her voice, and when she speaks, the mask will shatter. David nodded, a grim determination replacing his despair. He walked back across the street, not as the blind father, but as the man who was about to burn the theater down. David walked back into his house, the floorboards now feeling like tripwires. He could hear the shower running upstairs. Elena's morning ritual. It gave him exactly 10 minutes. He didn't go to the kitchen. He didn't make coffee. He went straight to the playroom. The armchair had been moved back. Elena must have checked the door before she went to bed. David pushed it aside, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He opened the red door. Lily was awake. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, staring at the toy chest where the recorder had been hidden. When she saw David, she didn't smile. She didn't move. She just pulled her knees tighter to her chest, her eyes wide with a haunting, habitual terror. David knelt in the cramped space. He didn't reach out to touch her. He knew now that his touch, however loving, was something she had been taught to fear. Instead, he pulled a small silver whistle from his pocket, a souvenir from a hiking trip they'd taken years ago, back before the silence had fully set in. Lily, he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. I heard everything. Lily's breath hitched. She looked at him, her gaze searching his face for a trick, for a hidden cruelty. I know about the red door, David continued, the words catching in his throat. I know about the quiet room, and I know that you can talk, Lil Bug. I know she told you I don't love you, but she lied. She lied about everything. He placed the whistle on the floor between them. I'm going to go to work today, or she'll suspect something, but I'm not really going. I'll be close. If she tries to take you to the car, if she tries to put you in that closet again, blow this. Blow it as hard as you can. I'll hear you, I promise. Lily looked at the whistle, then back at David. For the first time in months, her eyes weren't vacant. They were shimmering with a desperate, fragile hope. She reached out a trembling hand and closed her fingers around the silver metal. David, who are you talking to? Elena's voice drifted down the hallway, sharp and inquisitive. David stood up quickly, stepping out of the closet and pulling the door shut, just as Elena appeared in the doorway of the playroom. She was wrapped in a white silk robe, her damp hair slicked back. She looked radiant, a picture of domestic grace, but to David she looked like a predator in a shroud. Just checking on her, David said, his face a mask of practiced calm. She seemed restless last night. Elena stepped into the room, her eyes darting to the armchair, then to David. A flicker of suspicion crossed her face, a momentary tightening of the skin around her eyes. I told you, David. Checking on her only makes her more dependent, Elena said, her voice dropping into that low, warning tone. You're undermining the progress we're making with the specialist. Now go get dressed. You have that big meeting, remember? David nodded, walking past her. He felt her gaze boring into his back, heavy and cold. As he went to the bedroom to change, he saw Elena's purse sitting on the vanity. It was unzipped. Tucked into the side pocket, he saw the corner of 2 blue booklets. Passports. He felt a surge of adrenaline. Martha was right. Elena wasn't just planning a trip. She was planning an exit. He left the house at 8 a.m., making a show of starting his car and driving down the street. But 2 blocks away, he pulled into a visitor parking spot at a nearby apartment complex. He grabbed his laptop, his phone, and the digital recorder. He called Marcus, his business partner. Marcus, I need a favor. I need you to call the gallery. Tell them you're from the city's fire marshal office and you need to schedule an emergency inspection today at 10 a.m. Tell them the owner must be present. David, what's going on? You sound... Just do it, Marcus. Please, my daughter's life depends on it. There was a long pause. Okay, David, consider it done. David sat in his car watching his house through a pair of binoculars he'd kept in the glove box. He saw Elena come out of the house 20 minutes later. She looked agitated, pacing the porch while talking into her phone. She looked at her watch repeatedly. Finally, she got into her SUV and sped off. She didn't have Lily with her. David realized his mistake. Elena hadn't taken Lily to school. She'd left her in the house, alone, or so she thought. He waited until Elena's car disappeared from view, then he sprinted back toward his house. But as he reached the edge of his lawn, he saw something that stopped him cold. A large black sedan was parked in his driveway. A man he didn't recognize was walking toward his front door carrying a medical bag. David's blood ran cold. Elena wasn't just planning to kidnap Lily. She was planning to have her transported. David ducked behind a row of thick, manicured shrubs, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The man at the door was tall, wearing a charcoal suit that looked more like a uniform than business attire. He didn't knock like a guest. He used a key. Elena gave him a key. David felt a surge of nauseating realization. Elena wasn't just running, she was outsourcing. She had hired a private medical transport service, the kind that specialized in difficult children or patients who couldn't be moved through traditional means. With the falsified medical records she had meticulously curated, she could claim Lily was having a psychotic break or needed urgent, out-of-state institutionalization. He waited until the man disappeared inside, then he sprinted to the back of the house. He knew the mudroom door had a faulty latch if you pulled it just right. He slipped inside, the silence of the house now feeling predatory. From the foyer, he heard voices coming from upstairs. "She's in the playroom," the man said. His voice was clinical, devoid of emotion. The mother said she might be combative. "We have the sedative ready if necessary." "Understood," a second, deeper voice replied. David hadn't seen the partner. "Let's keep it quick. We need to be across the state line before the father realizes she isn't at school." David's vision blurred with a red-hot fury. He began to climb the stairs, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. He wasn't hiding anymore. He reached the landing just as the two men were standing in front of the red door. One was holding a small black bag. The other was reaching for the handle. "Step away from the door," David said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a man who had nothing left to lose. The men spun around. The one with the bag, the doctor, straightened his tie. "Mr. Miller? We were told you wouldn't be home." "I'm Dr. Aris. We're here to assist with Lily's transition to the New Hope facility. Your wife signed the emergency intake forms this morning." "My wife is a liar," David said, stepping closer. "And if you touch that door, I will call the police and charge you both with kidnapping." The second man, a burly individual who looked more like a bouncer than a medic, stepped forward. "Sir, we have court-admissible medical directives. Your wife has power of attorney regarding the child's medical care due to your documented history of denial regarding her condition." Documented history? David realized then how deep the rabbit hole went. Elena had likely been telling the therapists that David was the one standing in the way of Lily's recovery, painting him as the unstable parent who refused to see the truth. Suddenly, a high, piercing sound ripped through the tension. The whistle. It was a long, desperate blast from behind the red door. Then another and another. "Get out of my way," David roared. He didn't wait for them to move. He lunged at the burly man, using his shoulder to shove him against the wall. He reached for the red door and threw it open. Lily was standing in the center of the closet, the silver whistle clutched in her hand. Her face was tear-streaked, but her eyes were fixed on David. "Daddy!" The word was a ragged scream, the first time David had heard her voice in over a year. It wasn't shy. It wasn't mutistic. It was the sound of a child finally breaking the surface of a dark ocean. "I'm here, Lily, I'm here." David scooped her up, her small body trembling violently against his chest. "She's lying, Daddy," Lily sobbed into his neck. "She said you wanted me to go. She said the red room was my fault." The two men looked at each other, their professional masks finally flickering. The sight of a child screaming for her father didn't fit the narrative of a catatonic, unresponsive patient they had been sold. "Mr. Miller," Dr. Aris started, his voice less certain, "we were told she was nonverbal and dangerously unstable." "Does she look nonverbal to you?" David spat, holding Lily tighter. Before the men could respond, the sound of tires screeching in the driveway echoed through the house. Elena was back. The fire marshal ruse hadn't held her for long. David looked at the two men, then at his terrified daughter. "If you want to keep your medical licenses, you'll stay right here and watch what happens next. because the performance is over. He walked toward the stairs, Lily clutched in his arms just as Elena burst through the front door. She took one look at David, then at the men upstairs, and her face transformed. The perfect mother vanished, replaced by something sharp, cold, and utterly desperate. The silence that followed Elena's entrance was more violent than a scream. She stood in the foyer, her chest heaving, her expensive silk blouse damp with perspiration. For a heartbeat, she looked like a cornered animal. Then, with a chilling mechanical precision, she adjusted her posture. She smoothed her hair. She put the mask back on. "David," she said, her voice trembling with a manufactured sob. "Thank God you're here. These men, I had to call them. Lily had another episode after you left. She was hurting herself, David. I couldn't stop her." She took a step toward the stairs, her arms outstretched. "Give her to me, honey. You're scaring her. You know how she gets when you're aggressive." David didn't move. He felt Lily's fingernails digging into his neck, her small body shaking so hard he could feel her heartbeat against his own. "She's not having an episode, Elena," David said, his voice as cold as a tombstone. "She's talking. She just told me everything." Elena's face flickered, a momentary glitch in the programming. "She's talking? David, that's part of the manic cycle the doctors warned us about. Dissociative speech. She doesn't know what she's saying. She's confused." She turned to the two men standing on the landing behind David. "Dr. Aris, please. You see how he's holding her? He's reinforcing the trauma. We need to get her to the clinic immediately." Dr. Aris looked from the composed, elegant woman in the foyer to the weeping child and the father, whose eyes burned with a terrifying clarity. He looked down at the medical bag in his hand. "Mrs. Miller, the child just called for her father. She seems remarkably coherent for someone you described as catatonic." "Because she's terrified of him," Elena shrieked, her voice finally cracking, the high-pitched tone vibrating through the house. "He's the reason she's like this. I've been protecting her from his temper for years. Ask the school. Ask the therapists. I have the records." David reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He didn't say a word. He simply hit play on the recording from the night before. The hallway was filled with the sound of the red door closing. Then Elena's snarl. "Still won't talk? You think you're so smart, don't you? Thinking Daddy will save you if you just play the victim?" The sound of the smack echoed off the high ceilings. Elena froze. The color drained from her face until she was as white as the marble floor. Her mouth hung open, but no sound came out. It was the first time David had ever seen her truly silent. "Daddy doesn't really want a broken daughter anyway," the recording continued. "He only stays because of me. If I left, he'd leave you too." David turned off the phone. "I'm not the one who's confused, Elena, and I'm not the one who's leaving." That's a fabrication," Elena whispered, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for a script she had lost. "You edited that. You're trying to frame me because I found out about your affairs." The desperation was pathetic. David looked at Dr. Aris. "Call the police, now, or I'll make sure your names are on the front page of every paper as accomplices to child abuse." Aris didn't hesitate. He pulled out his phone. Elena saw the movement. Her eyes went wide, and for a second, David thought she was going to faint. Instead, she did something far more characteristic. She turned and ran. Not toward her daughter, not toward her husband, but toward her purse on the kitchen island. She grabbed it, her hands fumbling for the keys to the SUV. "Elena, stop!" David yelled, shifting Lily to one arm and reaching for the railing. But she was already out the door. The sound of the SUV's engine roaring to life tore through the quiet morning. Tires screeched as she backed out of the driveway, narrowly missing Martha, who was standing on the sidewalk with her phone held high, recording everything. David stood at the top of the stairs, holding his daughter. The perfect mother was gone, fleeing into a world that no longer believed her lies. But as he looked down at Lily, he realized the battle was only half over. The physical cage was gone, but the one Elena had built inside Lily's mind was still locked tight. "She's gone, Lily," David whispered into her hair. "She's never coming back, I promise." Lily pulled back, looking into his eyes. Her face was red and swollen, but for the first time she looked like a little girl instead of a ghost. "Promise, Daddy? Promise for real?" "For real," David said, his voice breaking. Downstairs, the distant wail of sirens began to grow louder. The neighbors were coming out of their houses. The glass house had finally shattered, and as the shards fell, David knew he had to be the one to pick them up, no matter how much they cut him. The blue and red lights of the police cruisers splashed against the pristine white siding of the Miller house, turning the suburban dream into a crime scene. For the neighbors peering through their blinds, it was a spectacle. For David, it was the first time he could breathe without feeling like he was inhaling glass. "Deep breaths, Lily, just like the ocean," David whispered, sitting with her on the back porch. He had wrapped her in her favorite fuzzy blanket, the one Elena usually kept tucked away because it cluttered the aesthetic of the living room. A female officer, Officer Sarah Vance, approached them with a gentle smile and 2 juice boxes. She knelt down, keeping a respectful distance from Lily. "Hey there, Lily, my name is Sarah. I'm a friend of your dad's. Is it okay if I sit here for a minute?" Lily looked at David. He nodded encouragingly. She gave a small, jerky nod. "You're very brave, Lily," Sarah said softly. "The whistle you blew? That was the smartest thing I've heard all day. It helped your dad find you." While Sarah sat with Lily, a detective named Miller, no relation, signaled for David to step into the kitchen. The house felt different now, hollow. Without Elena's curated presence, the coldness of the decor felt oppressive. "We've put out an APB on her vehicle," Detective Miller said, flipping through a notepad. "She's got a head start, but with the passport information you gave us, we've flagged the airports and border crossings. But David, we need to talk about the house." "What about it?" David asked, his eyes darting to the stairs. "We did a preliminary sweep of the master bedroom and her home office," the detective said, lowering his voice. "We found a shredder that's been running hot for the last hour. She tried to get rid of a lot, but she was in a rush. We found these in the bottom of the bin." He held up a clear evidence bag. Inside were scraps of paper, not medical records, but bank statements. David squinted at the numbers. "She's been draining your joint savings for 18 months, David," the detective explained. "Small increments. Not enough to trigger an alert, but it adds up to nearly $200,000. And there's more. We found a lease agreement for a small apartment in a city 3 states over, under a different name, Elena Vance." David felt a cold shiver. Vance. That was her maiden name, but she'd used it to set up an entire secondary life. She wasn't just planning to take Lily, she was planning to erase us. "It looks like she was building a narrative," the detective continued. "We found a diary, not like the neighbors. This one was written by Elena. It's filled with fabricated entries about your violent outbursts and your neglect of Lily. If she had made it to that other state and filed for custody there, with these journals and those falsified medical records, David, you might never have seen your daughter again." David leaned against the counter, the same counter where Elena had chopped asparagus with such practiced grace. He realized then that the shyness wasn't just a symptom of Lily's trauma, it was a weapon Elena was using to ensure the girl couldn't contradict the story. "She's a sociopath," David whispered. "She's a ghost," the detective corrected, "and right now she's a ghost on the run." Suddenly, a commotion broke out at the front door. David ran toward the foyer, his heart in his throat. Had they caught her? It wasn't Elena. It was Martha. She was being held back by a uniformed officer, but she was waving a small plastic object in the air. "David, David, you have to see this," she shouted. "I found it in the bushes where she threw it when she backed out." David stepped forward, taking the object from the officer. It was a digital camera, one of those small, rugged ones used for vlogging or action sports. "I saw her hide this in the playroom window weeks ago," Martha panted, her eyes wide. "She wasn't just watching Lily. She was recording her. She wanted to catch Lily acting out to prove her point to the doctors. But she forgot it when she ran." David's hands shook as he turned the camera on. He scrolled to the most recent video. It wasn't a video of Lily acting out. It was a video of the kitchen taken from a hidden angle on top of the refrigerator. The date stamp was from 3 days ago. David hit play and watched as the screen showed Elena standing alone in the kitchen practicing. She was standing in front of the mirror, crying, but there were no tears. She would sob, then stop, check her reflection, adjust her hair, and then sob again, higher and more shrill. Then she would speak to an empty chair. "I'm so sorry, David. I tried to tell you she was getting worse. I tried to save her from herself." She was rehearsing the lie. David felt a wave of nausea so strong he had to look away. She hadn't just been abusing them. She had been choreographing their destruction. But as he looked back at the screen, he saw something else. In the background of the video, through the kitchen window, he saw Lily standing in the backyard. She was looking right at the camera. She knew. She had seen the rehearsal. David walked back to the porch where Lily was sitting with the officer. He knelt in front of her and showed her the camera. "Did you see her doing this, Lily?" Lily looked at the screen, her small face hardening into a look of recognition that no 7-year-old should possess. She reached out and touched the glass. "She told me if I didn't play the part," Lily whispered, her voice steady for the first time. "She would make you go away forever. I stayed quiet so you could stay home, Daddy." David pulled her into a hug so tight it felt like they were one person. The silence hadn't been a symptom. It had been a sacrifice. "No more parts, Lily," David vowed. "The play is over." But even as he held her, the detective's radio crackled. "We have a sighting of the white SUV, heading north on Interstate 85. High speed, proceed with caution." The final act had begun. The flashing lights of the patrol cars outside seemed to pulse in time with David's racing heart. The radio chatter from Detective Miller's shoulder was a frantic staccato of coordinates and mile markers. Elena was pushing the SUV toward the state line, driving like a woman who knew that if she stopped, the ground would swallow her whole. "She's heading for the bridge," the radio crackled, "requesting backup at the toll plaza." David stood in the center of his living room, surrounded by police and the wreckage of his marriage. He looked at the walls, the expensive art, the photos of a smiling family that never truly existed. It was all a mirage. "David, stay here," Detective Miller said, grabbing his jacket. "We have units in pursuit. We'll bring her in." "I can't just sit here," David said, his voice raw. "You have to," Miller countered, pointing toward the porch. "Look at your daughter. She's already lost one parent today. Don't make her lose the other to a high-speed chase. Stay, be the father she thought she was protecting." David looked through the glass door. Lily was sitting with Martha now. The old woman was holding Lily's hand, whispering something that made the little girl nod slowly. The neighbor everyone called crazy was the only one who had been sane enough to see the truth. David sat on the bottom step of the stairs, the red door of the playroom visible at the end of the hall. He felt a wave of exhaustion so heavy it felt like physical pain. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The house was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence. The kind that follows a thunderstorm. Suddenly, Miller's radio erupted again, but the tone had changed. It wasn't frantic anymore. It was somber. "Dispatch, we have a 1050 at the bypass. White SUV. Vehicle left the roadway at the overpass, overturned, requesting EMS and fire immediately." David stood up, his legs feeling like lead. "Is she—" Miller listened to the update, his face hardening. He looked at David, then away. "She lost control, David. Hit the guardrail at 80 miles per hour. The car, it didn't hold up." David felt a strange hollow sensation in his chest. He didn't feel grief. He didn't feel joy. He felt a profound sense of waste. All those years of performance, all that calculated cruelty, and it ended in a twisted heap of metal on a cold highway. "Is she alive?" David whispered. "They're extracting her now," Miller said, clicking off his radio. "But David, there's something else. The officers on the scene. They found something in the passenger seat, a notebook, and a letter addressed to you." David walked to the porch. He sat next to Lily and pulled her into his lap. He didn't tell her about the crash, not yet. He just held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, watching the sun finally begin to set over the neighborhood. An hour later, a cruiser pulled into the driveway. A young officer got out and handed a manila envelope to Detective Miller, who brought it over to David. "The medic said she was conscious for a few minutes before they loaded her into the helicopter," Miller said quietly. "She told them to make sure you got this. She said it was her final masterpiece." David opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, elegant and ivory-colored. The handwriting was perfect. No tremors, no signs of the chaos she had just caused. "David, you were never supposed to look behind the curtain. We had a perfect life, didn't we? I gave you the perfect house, the perfect reputation, and a daughter who was quiet enough to never bother you. You should have thanked me. But since you insisted on breaking the set, I decided to take the show on the road. You think you've won? Look in the floorboard of the playroom. under the loose plank by the red door. I left a little something for you to remember me by. Enjoy the silence, David. It's all you have left." David handed the letter to Miller, his blood running cold. The playroom, she left something there. They ran inside, Lily trailing behind them, sensing the shift in energy. David burst into the playroom and fell to his knees by the red door. He felt around the floorboards until his fingers caught on a slight protrusion. He pried the wood up. Underneath wasn't a bomb or a weapon. It was a stack of legal documents, neatly tied with a black ribbon. David untied the ribbon. The first page was a birth certificate, but it wasn't for Lily Miller. It was for a girl named Maya Sterling. David stared at the name. Who is Maya Sterling? He flipped to the next page. It was a missing persons flyer from a city 500 miles away. The photo was of a 3-year-old girl with dark curls and a familiar, haunting gaze. The date of the disappearance was exactly 4 years ago. The same month, Elena had given birth to Lily in an out-of-state clinic while David was away on a long-term project in Europe. The room began to spin. David looked at Lily, who was standing in the doorway, clutching her headless teddy bear. "David," Miller whispered, reading over his shoulder. "Elena didn't just abuse her, she stole her." The shocking truth hit David like a physical blow. The woman he called his wife wasn't just a monster. She was a kidnapper, and the girl he had raised as his daughter wasn't his daughter at all. The world didn't just crumble, it dissolved. David sat on the floor of the playroom, the birth certificate for Maya Sterling trembling in his hand. He looked at the paper, then at the girl standing in the doorway. The girl he had bathed, fed, and loved for 4 years. The girl who called him Daddy. "David?" Detective Miller's voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "We need to verify this. We need to call the National Center for Missing Children." David didn't hear him. He was looking at Lily. No Maya. He remembered the birth. Elena had insisted on a private clinic in a remote part of Vermont while David was overseeing a massive hotel project in London. She'd sent photos of a newborn wrapped in a pink blanket. She'd handled all the paperwork. He had arrived home 2 weeks later to a crying infant and a wife who seemed glowingly, perfectly maternal. He realized now why Elena had kept Lily so isolated. It wasn't just to hide the abuse, it was to hide the resemblance. If Lily never went to public playgroups, if she never saw a doctor who wasn't on Elena's payroll, no one would ever notice that she didn't look like David or Elena. "Daddy?" Lily whispered, her voice small and fragile. She stepped into the room, her eyes fixed on the papers on the floor. "Why are you crying?" David looked up at her, his heart shattering into a million jagged pieces. How do you tell a child that her entire life is a fiction? That the woman who raised her stole her from a grocery cart or a playground? That the man she calls Daddy is a stranger who was tricked into the role? "I'm not crying, Lil Bug," David lied, his voice thick. He reached out and took her hand. It felt the same small bones, the same soft skin. I'm just so happy you're safe." "Mr. Miller," the detective said, his hand on David's shoulder. "We found a match. Maya Sterling. Disappeared from a park in Ohio 4 years ago. The mother, she never stopped looking. She's been posting on message boards every single week." David felt a surge of nausea. Somewhere, 3 states away, a woman had been living in a nightmare for 1,460 days. She had likely stared at the same moon David had, wondering if her daughter was warm, if she was fed, if she was loved. And all that time, the girl was in David's house, being systematically silenced by a woman who had treated her like a stolen trophy. "Where is she?" David asked. "The mother." "She's in Columbus," Miller said. "We've contacted the local precinct. They're sending a car to her house now." "David, you know what this means." David knew. It meant the end of the Miller family, the end of his life as he knew it. He looked at the red door, the symbol of the prison Elena had built. He realized that he, too, had been a prisoner. He had been the audience for a play that was actually a crime. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a call from the hospital where Elena had been airlifted. David answered, his hand shaking. "Hello? Mr. Miller? This is Dr. Aris. No, sorry, I'm the attending surgeon at Mercy General. Your wife, she didn't make it. She went into cardiac arrest 10 minutes ago. I'm so sorry." David hung up the phone. He felt nothing, No grief, no relief, just a profound, hollow silence. Elena was gone, taking her secrets and her madness to the grave. She had left David with a choice. He could hide the truth and keep the girl he loved, or he could do the one thing Elena never did. He could tell the truth. He looked at Lily. She was watching him with that same observant, quiet intensity. Is Mommy coming home? David knelt down so he was eye level with her. He took a deep breath, the air finally feeling clear of Elena's perfume. No, Lily, she's not, but someone else is. Someone who has been looking for you for a very long time. He took the missing persons flyer and showed her the photo of the 3-year-old girl. Do you remember this, Maya? Lily, Maya, stared at the photo. Her finger traced the image of a woman standing behind the toddler in the picture. The woman had the same dark curls, the same shape of the eyes. A memory, long buried under layers of Elena's terror, began to flicker in the girl's eyes. "The lady with the cookies," she whispered. "The lady who sang the sun song." David closed his eyes as a sob finally broke through. The sun song. "You are my sunshine." He'd never sung that song to her. Elena had hated it. "Yeah," David choked out. "The lady with the sun song. She's coming to get you, baby. She's coming to take you home." "But you're my daddy," Lily said, her bottom lip trembling. David pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her neck. "I will always be your daddy, Maya. No matter where you go, no matter whose name is on the paper. I'm the one who heard the whistle, remember? I'm the one who's never going to let anyone hurt you again." He stood up, holding her tight, and walked out of the playroom. He walked past the red door, past the empty master bedroom, and down the stairs. He walked out onto the porch, where the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple. The police were waiting, the social workers were waiting, and somewhere on a highway heading east, a mother was driving toward a miracle. David sat on the porch swing, rocking the girl who wasn't his but who would always belong to him. He knew the next few days would be a whirlwind of lawyers, DNA tests, and heartbreak, but as he watched the stars come out, he realized the silence was finally gone. And for the first time in 4 years, the house across the street was dark, because Martha was finally sleeping, knowing the girl in the window was free. The airport arrival terminal was a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed whispers. David sat on a cold plastic chair, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles were white. Beside him sat Lily, or Maya. She was wearing a new blue dress, her hair brushed into soft curls that caught the light. She wasn't hiding behind his legs anymore. She was sitting tall, clutching the headless teddy bear that had seen her through the darkest nights of the Red Room. "Is she almost here, David?" she asked. She had stopped calling him Daddy 2 days ago, a transition that felt like a slow-motion knife to his chest, yet he encouraged it. He knew that for her to heal, the foundations of Elena's house had to be cleared away entirely. "Any minute now, sweetheart," David said, his voice thick. A side door opened and a woman stepped out. She looked older than she did in the missing persons flyer. Her hair was streaked with gray, and her face bore the deep, etched lines of 4 years of sleepless agony. This was Sarah Sterling. The world seemed to stop. Sarah's eyes scanned the terminal until they landed on the small girl in the blue dress. She froze. A sob escaped her, a sound so raw and primal that even the busy travelers paused to look. David stood up, gently nudging Maya forward. "Go on," he whispered, his heart breaking and mending at the same time. "It's okay." Maya took one step, then another. She looked at Sarah, her head tilted. Sarah fell to her knees, her arms open, tears streaming down her face. She didn't scream. She didn't rush. She waited. Then Maya began to hum. It was a faint, wavering tune. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Sarah let out a choked cry and finished the line, her voice trembling. "You make me happy when skies are gray." Maya broke into a run. She threw herself into Sarah's arms, and for the first time, David heard a sound he had waited years for. It wasn't a scream of terror or a whisper of compliance. It was the pure, ringing laughter of a child who had finally been found. David watched them from 10 feet away, a ghost in their reunion. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Detective Miller. "You did the right thing, David," the detective said quietly. "Most men would have tried to fight it. Most men would have kept the lie to keep the daughter." "I didn't keep her," David said, wiping a tear from his cheek. "I saved her. That's what a father does." 6 months later, the house in the suburbs was gone. David had sold it the moment the investigation closed, unable to walk past the playroom or the kitchen without seeing Elena's shadow. He moved to a small apartment in the city, closer to his firm, and dedicated his weekends to a very specific drive. He pulled up to a modest house in Ohio, the yard filled with sunflowers. A dog barked inside, and a moment later the door flew open. "David!" Maya, who now went by Maya Lily to honor the man who saved her, sprinted down the porch steps. She looked different. Her cheeks were flush with health and she wore a bright yellow t-shirt. She jumped into David's arms and he swung her around, the weight of her feeling like a blessing. Sarah stepped onto the porch, a peaceful smile on her face. "She's been waiting by the window for an hour," she called out. They spent the afternoon in the backyard. Maya talked. She talked about her school, her new dog, the art project she was working on. The silence was a memory, a shed skin. As the sun began to set, David sat with Sarah on the porch swing. "She asks about you every day," Sarah said softly. "She tells me how you heard the whistle. She calls you her hero dad." "I just listened," David said. "Finally?" "Most people don't," Sarah replied, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "Thank you for giving me my life back, David, and for giving her hers." David looked out at the yard where Maya was chasing the dog. He thought about Martha, who he still sent flowers to every month. He thought about the red door, which had been turned into kindling. And he thought about the man he used to be, the one who thought silence was just shyness. He realized then that the most cinematic stories aren't the ones with the biggest explosions or the most dramatic betrayals. They are the stories of the quiet moments when the truth finally wins. As he drove away that evening, watching Maya wave from the porch until she was just a small speck in the rearview mirror, David didn't feel lonely. He felt light. The play was over. The curtain had fallen, and for the first time in his life, the silence was finally, beautifully broken.